everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I'm your host, Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove is not with me. He is instead in Boston. He will be back with me in Germany later on this week. Speaking of Germany, that's what today's show is going to be about. I am talking to Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. He makes his return. He helped us preview the Bundesliga season back in August, I believe. He is now back with us 9 weeks in to give an update on how things have gone so far, looking at the top of the table, how Borussia Monchengladbach have managed to take that top spot, but then also the issues currently faced by Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund. That's a lengthy conversation. We update Americans abroad and who's doing well, including Weston McKennie at Schalke, Tyler Adams at RB Leipzig, and John Brooks at Wolfsburg. And then we talk a little bit about Daryl and I's trip and some of the teams we're going to be seeing and why those games are going to be of interest to you and also for us, of course. Lots of great content in there. Matt is always wonderful. He brings the knowledge. He corrects my knowledge or lack thereof when the situation requires. That happens a couple times. And that's why I like having Matt on, because experts know things and help me feel better about not knowing things, because then I do know those things. I think all that made sense. But given that we've reached the point where I ramble in the introduction, I will stop with that and instead say, with me now, once again, returning to the Total Soccer Show, is Mr. Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. Matt, thank you very much for taking the time once again.
I love how my Mr. has been appended not only to my Twitter name, but to my name on the show.
Of course. Oh, yes.
It sort of happened.
Yes. I mean, well, we're all about formality here. We want to make sure you get your proper title and proper respect.
All right. Full wins or nots all around.
Perfect. You know the style. In fact, I have my tie on. I'm wearing a T-shirt, but with a tie on, just because that's how formal you and I tend to be.
Awesome. I'm sure you've been watching Great British Bake Off then, because that's great from their playbook this past week.
Yeah, right? Like, why would you still go tie when it's like 105 degrees outside? That one seems a bit much for me. At least loosen the necktie a little bit.
I know. He had to be eliminated for that reason alone.
There we go. Spoiler alert for Great British Baking Show. We do apologize, but not really, because you should be caught up on that, because why aren't you caught up on that? But we are not here to talk British baking. We could probably do that, and I would love to hear your analysis of all the bakers and what they're doing. I feel like you'd be good at that. But instead, we're going to talk Bundesliga. We've got a lot to catch up on. 9 games in. Through those first 9 games, Matt, which teams have impressed you in the best possible way, and which teams have maybe stood out in the worst possible way?
Oh, I mean, I figured we really don't have to look any farther than Borussia Monchengladbach in terms of who's impressed me the most. I mean, I'm really surprised that they're top of the league. And you know, when I look at like my sort of preseason predictions, I really didn't know which way things were going to go. They have a new coach, of course. They have sort of a new style. It was pretty unclear whether that was going to take right away. And, you know, it didn't take long at all. They're playing really well. They pretty much deserve to be top right now, because there's been a lot of inconsistency at just about every other club. And they're the best in the league at the moment.
And how have they managed to start so strongly and managed to keep it going? And while we're on the subject, can you also say their manager's name? Because I feel like I will mispronounce it if I do so.
Oh yeah, it's real simple. It's just Marco Rosa.
Rosa.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Not Rose, not Marco Rose. Rosa.
Yeah, you know, every single syllable must be pronounced in German. You can't just get away with these silent letters at the end of a word.
All right, that's good to know. We are going to Germany, so I'll have to remember that one.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. We're heading there at the end of this week, in fact, to see some Dusseldorf, Frankfurt, and. I think that way. It's Frankfurt, Bayern Munich, Dusseldorf, Koln is who we're going to see.
Oh my God, Dusseldorf, Koln. That's going to be a great. That's a real regional derby.
Oh, is it? I have done zero research on that, so we're going to go back to it later because I want to know all about it. But first, I wanted to ask you about Gladbach. Yeah, how have they managed to get this strong start underway?
Well, I feel like they have. They've basically added very, very intelligently to the squad that they already had. I mean. Even last season, Gladbach was, quite a good team who were in some ways unlucky to miss out on Champions League football. They were up in the top 4 for a lot of the season, and sort of things were starting to come together for them already. And the people who they added over the summer, guys like Marcus Thuram and Stefan Leiner, and they brought back their loanee Laszlo Benes, who had really disappointed in his original stint at the club, but sort of has seem to have matured. And for some reason, not only have the new guys hit the ground running, but they seem to have really taken to the new style of the club. The old coach, Dieter Hecking, played a pretty slow build-up, or that was sort of his preferred style, which, they had the technicians to make that work. But that's really not necessarily like where the modern Bundesliga is at. That's not necessarily going to be a, league-winning or even Champions League qualifying style. And Marco Rose, who had so much success at, RB Salzburg, definitely wanted to play a lot more vertically. He brought in some, both of the new forwards that they brought in, Marcus Thuram and Brielle Embolo, are very fast. And they just cause a lot of problems for a lot of teams' back lines. They just put a lot of pressure on them, and they get themselves into dangerous positions a lot. It's not all there yet. I mean, I think that they probably are going to have a bumpy ride coming up because they have some fairly tough matches. They have a lot of guys who are injured. Of course, they have Europa League to contend with, but I feel very confident about them right now. I'm really pleased because it's nice to see another team other than especially Bayern and to a lesser extent Dortmund do so well.
Yeah. Despite Serginho Dest deciding he's going to play for the United States, I still have my American anxieties. But yes, woohoo indeed, woohoo indeed. So a few of these questions about various teams in the league are going to be sort of American-centric. Here's the first one. Fabian Johnson has only managed, I believe, 3 appearances in the league so far this season. He's 31, says he still has aspirations to play for the national team. Do you think he needs a move? And do you think he should still be getting looks with the U.S. men's national team based on what you have seen from him so far this season?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, he doesn't play all that much. That's in part because they have a pretty big, deep squad, in part because he's had some, I think he's got a groin issue at the moment, which has sort of kept him on the sidelines. But I truthfully think for a player of that age, it's probably okay to go and play, 25 games a season or something like that, if you're lucky, because you're just going to stay a lot fresher that way. You're going to probably avoid a few extra injuries. And I'm not sure whether that's harming his status with Greg Berhalter. I don't really even know where Greg Berhalter's head is at with Fabian Johnson. I'm sure that he has some reason or other why he hasn't called him in by now. I guess he's not part of the group yet. But I definitely think just in terms of pure talent and pure, just sort of what he might bring to the table, he's definitely worth a look. I mean, it makes no sense to me that he hasn't been at least given a sort of a try, just because this is a guy who's played in a lot of different situations under a lot of different coaches. He's probably going to be one of those guys who will pick up whatever system Berhalter wants to play quicker than a lot of guys. And, even if he doesn't play a lot, he can be there as like a leader and teacher.
And for you personally, would you like to see him played for the U.S. like on like left wing as a more attacking spot? Would you like to see him played in defense? Where would he fit in for you?
Oh, I mean, I guess now that we have Dest on board, and I guess the idea is to play him at the back and play him as a sort of an attacking fullback. I know Berhalter only likes to have one attacking fullback at a time, or typically, so it probably would make sense to play him in midfield or on the wing as an attacking winger. I think he's another player who just basically has the talent to play on either wing at the back or attacking. He's better than most of the guys we have.
So going back to Marco Rose for a moment, the manager of Borussia Monchengladbach, he's only been there for a few months now. I'm wondering how long you think it is until Bayern Munich or Borussia Dortmund come calling for him, which is, I guess, my way of saying it seems like they are sort of neither one of those two clubs are particularly happy with their current managers. They're not unhappy, but they're not in love with them is the vibe I'm getting. And so I guess my question is, what Rose is doing at Gladbach, do you think that would appeal to the boards of Bayern or Dortmund, or does like sitting back, being a bit more defensive, counterattacking, does that not appeal so much?
I'm not sure that you're characterizing what they're doing entirely correctly. Okay. I don't think that they're sitting back and counterattacking so much as they are playing a very like sort of speed proactive style, a style that is based on sort of, playing early balls to quick guys to take on players quickly. I mean, it's very much the Red Bull style. It's the style that sort of we have seen in past years from RB Leipzig, that we have seen, under Rosa at Salzburg. And I don't think that's the kind of style that like you're ever going to be sort of, brought to book for playing. I mean, maybe at Bayern where you have a lot of sort of bigger egos, and you might have some attacking players who are not all that interested in pressing. It might be difficult to implement, but I think certainly at Dortmund, it would be a style that would be familiar. In some ways, it would be going back to elements of Klopp's style, and that certainly brought the fans in and made people happy and won things. Just when it comes to the sort of specifics of the situation right now for Dortmund and Bayern, I think it would be pretty hard for him to, catapult into either of those teams anytime soon. I mean, if he wins the league this year, which, woohoo, that would be really interesting and a fun story for that to happen. I could see it perhaps if that were to happen, because, Gladbach is a club that has proved over the past several years that they're a club that can attract some good players, but, they can't attract the top players that Dortmund and Bayern can. So I can see how that kind of squad and the kind of money that either one of those clubs would want to pay him might be appealing. But really, I feel like he is probably destined to be at Gladbach for a few years, and he's probably destined to be a coach who gets a chance to build something. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this move that Max Eberl, the sporting director at Gladbach, made to get rid of Dieter Hecking, despite the fact that he was in a European place, and bring on this exciting new coach, is in a lot of ways like it strikes me as the kind of move that Dortmund made, bringing in Klopp. I mean, the situations are very different, but I think this was a moment where the club thought to themselves, all right, this is the guy. I don't care what our situation is. We need to have this guy. And they are just basically putting all their chips in on and saying, we think that he is either going to, win a title for us, or he's going to at least take us into the Champions League consistently. And, early returns are good. We'll see how it looks after 34 games.
Would you agree that Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich maybe are less inclined to push all of their chips in when it comes to their current managers?
Oh, completely.
Okay.
I think that both on the sort of fan level and the boardroom level, there are definitely sort of rumblings of pretty serious dissatisfaction. Mostly in that these two teams have sort of played such inconsistent football all season long. It's been sort of an up and down ride. They've dropped points in weird junctures. They've sort of, lost to teams that they have no business losing to. I mean, Dortmund lost to Union Berlin, of all clubs. Bayern have lost to Hoffenheim, have drawn Augsburg. It's not a good look results-wise, but in some ways it's an even worse look form-wise. I mean, there's been plenty of games this season where it just looked like both Niko Kovac and Lucien Favre don't have a clear plan of what they want their teams to do. Or if they do have a clear plan, it's a very unattractive clear plan, which is to say, oh, we got a lead, let's just sit on it and see what happens. I would not be surprised at all if we got to, say, the winter break and one of these two teams were like in fourth or fifth place, which I think is a definite possibility. I would not be surprised to see one of the two guys get fired.
Let's stick with Bayern Munich then for a moment. If it were to be Kovac who departs this January, what type of manager do you think they look to replace him? Because I read a few different things that made it sound like the players were starting to have a bit of nostalgia for the days of Pep Guardiola. But then I also remember moments of him not necessarily being as popular or being kind of rigid and obviously demanding a lot of his players. So I doubt they're going to be getting Pep again. But who do you think they might go after, or what style of manager might they go after?
That's really tricky, actually, because there are not a lot of bold-faced, super attractive names on the market at the moment. I definitely think you're right that there is a serious nostalgia for Pep Guardiola at Bayern, not only because he sort of raised their profile globally. I mean, Bayern is a club that really likes to see itself as on par or close to it with the two big Spanish clubs. And I mean, in terms of success in Europe, they're probably a cut below those two, but not as far as you might think. And attracting a manager of the quality and sort of reputation of Pep Guardiola was a really, really big ego boost for Bayern Munich. And this is a club with a huge ego. So in a way, just the very fact that they hired Niko Kovac, who was, let's put it, pretty realistically, he was a successful but not outlandishly successful Bundesliga coach, and to stick with him for a season and now maybe another half season or another whole season. In a lot of ways, this is already something of a come down for a club like Bayern. They think of themselves as a destination club, and the fact that they couldn't really line up anybody sort of bigger or better than Niko Kovac, I think, nags at both the management of this club and the fans of this club. I think when it comes to like the kind of coach that they would want, they probably would want somebody who is known for tactical innovation or a certain inspirational style. I mean, as you said, the players at Bayern did live with a lot of sort of, highly detailed instruction from Pep Guardiola, but from what I could tell, almost all of the players took to it really well. Even guys who were really experienced and probably at times would have thought to themselves, okay, I know how to play football at this point. Actually, you talk to guys like, Arjen Robben, and they'll give quotes like, he was an amazing coach. I learned a lot. I became an even better player under him. And I feel like the ideal situation for a club like Bayern is to attract somebody who already has both a reputation for tactical innovation and some success, either a title or a Champions League final appearance, something like that, that would sort of put them on the pedestal that they think that they should be on. I don't know who that would be, unless maybe if Pochettino gets fired, maybe they would take a pretty hard look at him.
I think you meant to say Jose Mourinho, but we'll let it slide. That's fine. This is kind of a strange question because we're talking about Bayern Munich, but like for you, how desirable do you think that job is? Because on the surface, it's a massive club with a record of success, and yet if you're going in there, there is an immediate expectation that you will win the league and that you will do so in a convincing style, playing attractive soccer. And it does seem like it doesn't lend itself to managers who haven't established that reputation, because by all accounts, the kind of feeling around Kovac in that locker room is sort of like, yeah, but you're not really quite that level where we really think that you're going to push us to that next kind of level in terms of playing in the Bundesliga, playing in the Champions League. So it makes me wonder if it is sort of a very difficult task that a manager might undertake when getting hired by Bayern Munich.
Yeah, it is a difficult task. I mean, I feel like any job at that level, whether it's Bayern or one of the two big clubs in Spain, or perhaps Juventus or City, Liverpool these days, the expectation is that you not only win every game, but you win you throttle the other team, and everyone knows in their heart of heart that those are unrealistic expectations. But there's sort of this feeling at clubs like that where they want to be unstoppable, and they want a coach who can sort of reinforce that feeling of unstoppability. I feel like at the same time, just because of the way the Bundesliga has been over the past several years, especially compared to La Liga or the EPL, it's been an easier ride for Bayern coaches than for coaches in those other two leagues, because the rivals have not been as strong. That might be changing. I feel like, at least in terms of ambition and the kinds of players they can attract. Dortmund has become a bit more ambitious in the last couple of years. We're looking at some pretty serious development at Leipzig and perhaps at Gladbach as well. It's only going to get harder. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I feel like if you are an ambitious coach who thinks highly of themselves, it's a hugely attractive job too. I mean, because you basically have this seat on the top of the pecking order in the entire Bundesliga. Anytime any player at any other club starts to play well for, half of a season, the rumor mill starts up that he's going to Bayern. And a really large percentage of the time, they do end up there. And the kinds of the resources you have at your disposal at Bayern, as well as just the sort of sheer competence at every other level of the club. I mean, this is one of those clubs where basically you don't have to do anything but coach. You don't have to worry about very much in the way of purchasing or playing style. You can basically just coach the players, and if you are successful, people love you.
Hey folks, much more still to come from my conversation with Matt Hermann of the Talking Fussball podcast. We're going to talk all things Bundesliga, as we have been, and will continue to be. But first, I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor, our friends over at Fubo TV, the best app for streaming soccer. It's the only soccer-focused TV streaming service with the obvious channels like FS1, FS2, NBC Sports, beIN Sports, but there's also TUDN, Universo, 11, Goal TV, etc., etc., etc. You have the cloud DVR feature, which allows you to store up to 500 hours. But if you fill that up, there's the 72-hour rewatch feature that Daryl and I have talked about previously, where if the game's been on, if it was a Friday night kickoff, you didn't have time to watch it Friday, you didn't get to it Saturday, but you want to watch it Sunday, it will still be there on demand for you to stream. Speaking of weekend soccer, there are plenty of games to keep an eye on this weekend, some of which we'll probably be mentioning on the weekend review. Saturday, we've got 10:30 a.m. Dortmund v. Wolfsburg on Fox Sports 2. That is a battle of the top half teams, Dortmund in 5th, Wolfsburg ahead of them. We'll see if that lasts. Then Saturday afternoon, 1:20 p.m., we've got Sevilla v. Atletico Madrid on beIN Sports. 6:50 p.m., the Netherlands hosting the United States on FS2/NBC Universo. That's the U17 World Cup. Hopefully things have improved for the United States in that regard. 11 p.m. Saturday, Necaxa versus Pachuca on TUDN Extra 2. That's the top of the table Necaxa featuring Ventura Alvarado, the American center back, who is the captain of the top-ranked side in Mexico. On Sunday, 9:30 a.m., Dusseldorf v. Koln. Matt and I are going to be talking about that game a little bit later on in the show. That's on FS1/TUDN. Daryl and I will be at that game, so if you want to watch it and be with us in spirit, you can be. And then obviously at 11:30 a.m. on Sunday, Everton v. Tottenham on NBC Sports and Telemundo. A big one there for both of those teams who have not had the season they would have liked so far. Maybe they get things going this Sunday. All of those games you can find on Fubo TV. If you do not yet have a Fubo subscription, you can get $10 off your first 3 months of Fubo TV by going to Fubo TV, FUBOTV.com/TSS. One more time, that's FuboTV.com/TSS to get $10 off your first month of Fubo TV. Thank you very much to Fubo for sponsoring today's episode. Now back to my chat with Matt Hermann. I mean, we're still talking about a Bayern Munich team that are, I believe, second in the table right now, 1 point behind leaders Gladbach. And if you do become that coach, if you're inheriting Bayern Munich, you're inheriting Robert Lewandowski, who is in probably the best form of his career or close to it. What do you make of his form? How has he been able to kind of reach this level where he is, I think, more than double second place in goal scoring in the Bundesliga right now? I think Timo Werner has 6. I think Lewandowski has 13. I'm assuming this is sort of the case of he is doing this in spite of Niko Kovac and not necessarily because of what Kovac is doing.
Yeah, well, I would actually say that most of Bayern's problems are in either defense or to a lesser degree sort of like midfield build-up. Their attack is actually great. Lewandowski is scoring. I mean, he probably could even score more in some cases. There's been some, chances where he's either given up a penalty. He gave away one. He gave the ball to Coutinho so he could get his first Bayern goal. He's had some misses, but for the most part, Robert Lewandowski is killing it at the moment. And truthfully, Serge Gnabry, who's played up front or sort of on the wing up front with him for much of the season, is also really, really blossoming as a player. I think there's a real understanding up front. It's just that that's really the only bright spot for Bayern. That's the only place where people can look at this team and be like, oh, this really works. It's pretty much everywhere else that things are a little hazy.
Just everywhere else, that's all. I wanted to ask one more about Lewandowski for a moment. I read an article for The Athletic by Raphael Honigstein.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, it was, but it was really surprising to me because I think of Robert Lewandowski as this just sort of consummate professional who you can rely on to score goals like clockwork, and I didn't realize that he sort of had this reputation of being a bit of a selfish striker, a bit of a selfish person at Bayern Munich. Is that something that you also felt? Were you familiar with that sort of narrative, that he had that reputation and that it seems to be changing now?
Oh, yeah. That was, pretty much ever since he got to Bayern, and this was very much addressed in the course of that article, he has sort of flirted with Real Madrid and to a lesser extent, bigger Premier League clubs, especially Manchester United and Chelsea. He sort of always seemed to be angling for a move, or at times you could almost set your watch at the preseason and midseason. Every transfer window, he would complain that Bayern needed to buy more players and that the squad wasn't good enough. I mean, he even did it this season, but he's more or less confined it to that point rather than the point of, oh, and not only that, but I might like to go somewhere else. What really seems to have happened is he's just figured out that Bayern is going to be his platform. Whatever he accomplishes as a player, I still think he has a lot to accomplish. I feel like, ever since his huge performance for Borussia Dortmund in that year when they made it all the way to the Champions League final, that was his big coming out party, like having a big game against Real Madrid, or a couple of big games, really. And people thought he was basically going to become the undisputed, best striker in the world. And really, he's kind of had to share that title with a lot of different people. I feel like the performances he's putting in this season and the fact that he really does have a chance to break the Bundesliga all-time goal scoring record, which is 40 by Gerd Müller back in the 70s. And, the fact that he's already got 13 goals in 9 games, if he keeps up that pace, he'll do it. I even think that in some cases, as I said, he could have scored more goals in certain situations if he gets a few lucky bounces. This could be, a season for the ages for Robert Lewandowski, and people could really start recognizing him as the best of the best.
All right. Well, let's move on from a club that might need or be in need of a new manager to talk about instead about maybe Borussia Dortmund. Just kidding. They might need one too. They're 5th in the Bundesliga table, 16 points from 9 games, 3rd in their Champions League group on goal difference. How much more time do you think Lucien Favre will be given this season?
That's really tricky because this Bundesliga season has gotten off to such a weird start. I mean, not only is it weird in that neither Bayern nor Dortmund are on top of the table, or not even Leipzig, which is what most people thought would be the 3rd club with a chance, but the crowd at the top is really, really tight. I mean, after match day 8, in fact, there were only 2 points separating the first 9 teams in the table. It's sort of opened up a little bit more. I mean, now it's 4 points separating 1 through 8 in the table, but still, a lot of the story is that there is no dominant team, and that at this point, 2.1 points per game, which is not a lot in the grand scheme of things, will get you to the top of the table in the Bundesliga. And so there's still time, and there's still the situation for Lucien Favre to sort of save himself if he can put together a string of good results. But there is just a nagging suspicion that he doesn't really know what to do with this squad. There is a suspicion that he sort of hung on to Akanji a little bit too long in the center of defense before his Manuel Akanji's mistakes began to pile up so much that he had to sort of try something else. There's a sense that he doesn't know exactly who his best partner for Axel Witsel in the middle of midfield is. There's a sense that he doesn't really know what to do with Julian Brandt, which was, probably Dortmund's most heralded signing of the summer, who has, played a lot in Europe and as a substitute in the league, and really probably deserves a little bit more. But, for whatever reason, Favre doesn't know exactly what to do with him. There's a sense that he has presided over a team who has shown a propensity to throw away leads. So I feel like if results tip poor as opposed to, tip in the right direction, he could actually be seeing himself out of the job in January.
And is this a case of it's not working because Favre plays a specific style or system, and he's having trouble finding the players that best fit that style, similar to Maurizio Sarri at Chelsea last season? Or is there just something else entirely going on?
I'd say there's something else entirely. I mean, Favre does not have a really, really, really strong signature style like Sarri does. He is a fairly tactically flexible coach. But at the same time, he also has, as a personality, a very sort of, inflexible, somewhat overly focused, nerdy quality that he gives off not only to, the press, but I feel like folks who have worked with him in the past, whether it's players or management types, describe him as a somewhat tricky person to work with. So I would not be surprised if, in some ways, just interpersonal issues as well as results might contribute to him not lasting all that long at Dortmund. I mean, I could be totally wrong. He has so many good players at his disposal. There is very much room for this to turn around for Dortmund, but it hasn't quite done so yet.
So right now, Dortmund sitting fifth in the table. Ahead of them would be Freiburg in third, Wolfsburg in fourth. Those are two teams who I don't believe we thought would be in those top four places when we last spoke. So I wanted to hear a bit about how they've been able to get to this point and how likely they are to stay there.
I would say Freiburg. I have a lot of time for Freiburg. I think it's a really cool club. It's one of sort of the smaller clubs in Germany, or smaller sort of financial means, shall we say. They are actually so small that they had a court decision go against them last week, saying that they're building a new stadium, and as things stand presently, they won't be able to play midweek games or games too early on Sunday because there's a law in Germany, saying you have to have a peace and quiet for certain hours of the day on Sunday. And they're just really small time. And it's really cool that they're doing well. And it's really cool that their coach, Christian Streich, who's a very sort of outspoken, woke, teacherly kind of guy, is doing well. But really, I have to be honest, I think most of their success this early season has to do with a weak schedule that they have had. I mean, I think that you look at the teams that they've faced so far. They've played Mainz, they've played Paderborn, they've played Koln, although they lost to them. They beat Hoffenheim before Hoffenheim turned around. They only drew against Augsburg, who are not a very good team, but they beat Dusseldorf, who were bad. I think things are going to turn around pretty quick for Freiburg. I mean, they did surprise me this past weekend by beating Leipzig, and I have to give them credit for that. But I think things are not going to go their favor in the near future.
And would that be the same for Wolfsburg as well?
No, I think they're a little bit. Sorry, my dog has become a little bit agitated. She really wants to go outside. I'm going to have to ignore her.
She has strong feelings about Wolfsburg, I'm assuming.
She does. Well, she doesn't like dogs that resemble wolves. She actually has problems with German Shepherds and Huskies and stuff. So maybe just the conversation.
That's what I'm thinking.
Sort of stirred her up a little bit.
If we need to move swiftly on, we can.
It's all good. It's all good. No, Wolfsburg, I think, are actually a bit more stable. I would not be surprised to see them stick around in the running for European places as this season wears on, mostly because I just think they have much, much better players, and they have a coach who seems to have come up with a plan that fits those players. I mean, it's a very, very defensively oriented game plan. And it's paid off hugely so far. I mean, they have conceded 5 goals, which is by leaps and bounds the best defense in the league. They have yet to lose a match, and I don't find them all that fun to watch. But they do have a few really, really nice players. I mean, Wout Weghorst, their striker, is a lot of fun. He's a big guy who can actually, use the ball pretty well and move. And I think, Jérôme Roussillon, despite the fact he's having kind of a funny season right now, is a fun player to watch. Josip Brekalo. But I think that they have a much better chance of sticking around toward the top of the table than Freiburg do.
And again, going back to the American perspective for a moment, John Brooks, obviously with Wolfsburg, but has been dealing with injuries, hasn't played as many games as maybe we would have liked to have seen so far. How involved has he been, and how involved do you expect him to be going forward? As in, is there a chance that he gets replaced if he remains sort of inconsistent with his injuries?
No. I think in that he is I think he's a really solid defender, not only in terms of his physicality and his ability to sort of mark other players out of the game, but he also is somebody who I think actually is going to add another dimension to Wolfsburg. I mean, they rely a lot on their central defenders to start their build up, and John Brooks is somebody who I think does that very, very well. He was out for 5 games. He started the first 3 games and played well. He was out for 5 games. He's back. He played well. I have no reason to think that he's not going to keep his place in this team. And as long as he stays healthy, that'll be a really good platform for him and for the USMNT.
Hey everybody, this is Taylor jumping in one more time to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Talisman Caps. Talisman Caps are the makers of high-end, quality-made caps and gear to help you support and celebrate your football club. They've got a few new offerings for those of you who are frequent checkers of Talisman. They've got some updates, including 5-panel hats. We've talked about the 6-panel hats previously. Now there are 5-panel ones, mostly Premier League teams as of now. You've got a Red Devils one, a Blue Lion one, a Spurs one, and a Liverbird one, all of them available in the 5-panel format. Another new offering from Talisman would be pins. They've got pins inspired by classic jerseys or the classic patterns of jerseys, including 1990 Manchester United, and 1989 Liverpool, USA 94, and there's even a great El Tri one, which I cannot bring myself to buy until the United States beats Mexico in some level of soccer, and then I feel better about things. If you want to feel better about your vintage Germany collection, you could go to their Vintage Vault, where they've got lots of different jerseys from the past, not just from the Bundesliga, but elsewhere. But for purposes of today's show, they've got a 1994, 1995 Kaiserslautern red Adidas home jersey. There's a blue and white Nike home jersey from Hertha Berlin from 1999, and a lovely Dortmund 96 long sleeve black and yellow home jersey with the puffy sleeves that are emblematic of that like mid to late 90s era. The nice puffy, big sleeves, bright yellow. It's a great jersey available at the Vintage Vault. And because Talisman are lovely, lovely folks, they will also help you out with a discount. You can get 10% off with a minimum purchase of $35, which is the price of one hat, when you use the promo code TOTALSOCCER10. One more time, that's 10% off with the discount code TOTALSOCCER10 at talismancaps.com. A link will be in the show notes for that offer. We very much appreciate that offer. We very much appreciate Talisman Caps for sponsoring today's episode. And with all that said, back one more time to my conversation with Matt Hermann. All right, so far I feel slightly better about the USMNT, at least the players, than the Bundesliga. Let's see if that keeps going as we talk about Schalke, because lately, similar to the Dortmund Bayern Munich narrative seeming to be like, yeah, they're winning, but like maybe the managers aren't impressing us so much. The narrative with Schalke seems to be like David Wagner is doing about as good of a job as he could be, and let's just wait until he finally gets some good players in the window, and like once they revamp the whole squad, he'll be good to go. And that kind of has me a little bit nervous, because I guess I find myself wondering if Weston McKennie, who seems to have become a key figure for David Wagner, I can't tell if that's because David Wagner thinks he's very good and enjoys what Weston McKennie brings, or because Weston McKennie is good enough right now, but maybe won't be down the road.
I'm definitely leaning towards the former. David Wagner seems to have a lot of time for Weston McKennie, okay. And in a lot of ways, Weston is a player that sort of fits what Wagner likes to do to a T. I mean, the thing that has turned things around for Schalke this season has been their hugely effective press. They have caused problems for just about every team that they've played with their pressing. I mean, I know that they did to Dortmund. I know they did to Bayern. They did to my team, Hertha. They just make it really hard for teams to build up in their preferred way, because, they just – I feel like they figured out both in positionally and with their personnel how to start a press and how to just sort of get opposing teams off balance quickly. If there is a criticism that I think is pretty valid, is that in some ways he might be too into pressing. For example, they have a striker named Guido Burgstaller who really just is there's a word in German called Chancentod, which basically means the death of a chance. And he is described very aptly as a Chancentod. He basically manages to mess up a lot of seemingly promising attacks because he's just not very good at actually putting the ball in the back of the net. He goes through streaks. He's in one of the longer, usually, streaks that he has of not scoring. But David Wagner really likes him because he's really good at pressing. He's really good at sort of being the tip of the spear. As far as how that works for Weston McKennie, I think as long as this team sort of, emphasizes that style, we all know what a runner he is. We all know that he understands, how to sort of apply a cover shadow. We all know that he is somebody who sort of likes to sort of get the ball and push it forward pretty quickly. And that's somebody that is always going to have a place in a David Wagner team. At the moment, I feel like he's in good company. They sort of have a nice thing going with their holding midfielder, Masquerade, and putting 2 8s in front of him. Sometimes it's McKennie as one of them and Suat Serdar as the other. Sometimes he'll go a different direction and maybe put Caligiuri in one of those spots. But I definitely think McKennie's going to play a lot for David Wagner.
And do you think that Schalke will go out and reinforce up top? Or where do you expect them to strengthen the most, either in January or sometime this summer? Because you mentioned Briel Embolo earlier. He left them this summer. I think they got rid of a few more other attacking options. So I'm wondering if that's where they'll be looking, or maybe it will be other positions that need strengthening.
Yeah, I definitely think that finding somebody who actually can score goals consistently is going to be really, really important for them. It's been a weird, long road for Schalke in that department. I mean, they've taken a lot of swings in the last several years. I mean, Briel Embolo was the guy who they were really putting a lot of hope into for a while. He spent most of his time there injured and or out of form. Mark Uth was last year's big swing for the fences. He had a huge season for Hoffenheim the year before and then did little to nothing for Schalke last season, and for whatever reason can't seem to get his way back into the side under Wagner. I definitely think that that's the place where they need to strengthen the most. I mean, I think if there was another spot that they need, Amin Arit is probably the only player who they have who can sort of play in the hole / play as a something of a 10/wing striker who adds a lot of creativity. They were hoping for a bit more from Benito Raman, who came in from Dusseldorf this summer. Maybe it's just going to take a little time. I mean, Arit is already showing signs of becoming a much better, more consistent player. He's a super exciting player, plays a lot of dangerous balls, dribbles a lot, takes a lot of bad long shots, but sometimes his audacious ideas come through hugely, as when he scored a crazy Trivela goal from the right wing.
That'll work.
A few weeks ago.
All right. So Schalke currently 7th on 15 points. One place ahead of them would be Leipzig, I think just ahead of them on goal difference. If you were giving Leipzig like a letter grade at this point in the season, what would they be for you? Because they are still, only 4 points off of first place. So maybe their place in the table is a little bit misleading, but I would also assume then that we haven't seen quite the consistency in the results that maybe we would have expected.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I think that Leipzig probably get a B. I mean, it's a strong, solid B. It may be even on the cusp of B+. It's been the last couple of weeks of less good results, let's just say, in the league. I mean, they basically, started off like a house on fire. They were on the top of the league. They, played Bayern to a draw in the middle of September. And ever since then, I mean, they got one win over Bremen, but they've lost to Schalke, and they deserve to lose, despite the fact that they came into that match as favorites. They've drawn Leverkusen, they've drawn Wolfsburg, they've lost to Freiburg. They just kind of have gone off the boil a little bit. I think that in some ways, if you sort of noticed who I was talking about having played, those are really hard games. Mm-hmm. Those are some of the best teams in the league. And things are going to get a lot easier in the coming weeks. They have Mainz, they have Hertha, they have Cologne, they have Paderborn. I would not be surprised to see them, get back up into the thick of the title race very soon. And I don't think that they have very many fundamental problems with the way that their team is functioning. I think that they're also going to benefit a lot from when Tyler Adams gets back.
You have anticipated my next question.
Yeah. And hit me with it.
Well, it was basically just going to be like, what do they need to improve overall, and why is the answer Tyler Adams? But yeah, essentially, I'm wondering where you think he fits in and what he will bring to this squad.
I just think he's going to be an upgrade in central midfield. They have had, Julian Nagelsmann has had to sort of finding where he wants to put guys in the center of midfield. He's been forced to sort of lean on Diego Demme quite a lot, and there's nothing against Diego Demme. He's been, he's their longest serving player. He's the guy who's been there from their rise from the regional leagues all the way up to the Bundesliga. He's a perfectly serviceable player, but he does not sort of stand out as a guy who you necessarily want to be mopping things up in central midfield if you are a team who wants to be playing at the Champions League level. And Tyler Adams is just a little bit better. He both brings a little bit more speed to the table. He brings a little bit, security with the ball. I just think that they're going to have a lot more success in turning the ball from defense to attack with Tyler Adams in the lineup, even if he's not going to be a day in, day out player for a little while as they sort of try and bring him back in from this long-term injury.
Do you think he is, if everybody is fit, if everybody is ready to go, do you think he is sort of in that starting 11, or is he still a bench player for Nagelsmann?
I think he's probably – I would be surprised if he was a, locked on starter in the very near future, because I think that they probably, they've had a really long and sort of bumpy road bringing him back from this injury. They've had a lot of different sort of things go wrong. So I don't think that they'll want to have another setback, but I would say, I don't know, by February, they're finished with the winter break and they've got a few games under their belt, I would be real surprised if he wasn't first choice. I think he does what this team wants him to do very, very well.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time because you've already been very generous. You are always very generous with your time. But I did want to ask you about that Dusseldorf Koln game. What is the significance of that rivalry, and who should we be paying attention to from those two teams?
I mean, the rivalry is basically it's less to do with those two clubs specifically, because let's face it, Cologne in the grand scheme of things is a much bigger club than is Fortuna Dusseldorf. They have found themselves in the same division a fair bit as, Cologne has hit hard times, and as Dusseldorf has sort of risen from the ashes. They took a real bad beat and went all the way down into the regional leagues for a while, but they're getting their act together. But it's more just the rivalry between those two cities. They're quite close together. You can take a train from one to the other in 45 minutes, and they both see themselves as like the center of things in that region of Germany, in Western Germany. Dusseldorf happens to be the capital of the state that they're both in, North Rhine-Westphalia, but Cologne is the bigger city. Cologne is probably the more culturally significant city. It's Can versus Kraftwerk, if you want to put it in krautrock terms.
That's outstanding.
It's also they're both really into carnival culture. Carnival, which a lot of folks outside of Germany don't really understand. In Western Germany is this all-consuming thing, much as it is in like Venice or in Brazil or something like that. And both of those cities pride themselves as being like a center of carnival. And a lot of times people in those cities don't even like to say the name of the other city, or like to sort of, any chance they get, cut it down to size in any way that they can. So there's the clubs. I wouldn't say that it's like a blood rivalry in the same way that Cologne and say Gladbach have a blood rivalry, but just the two cities hate each other, and you're going to probably get a really fun time if you go to that game.
All right. And so I know this is like an amateur question, but I'm an amateur when it comes to the Bundesliga. I keep calling them Koln because I thought I wasn't supposed to call it Cologne. Is it Cologne? Is that the better way to pronounce it?
Oh, I mean, it's hard. You actually need to say, if you're going to try and say it correctly, you say Köln.
Yeah.
So it's one of those weird, umlautized vowels that is kind of hard to make if you're just speaking fluid English. So Koln is definitely not right. Köln is right. Cologne, if you're speaking English, is just easier to say. Okay. So I often find myself saying Cologne. I mean, if I'm feeling froggy, I say Erste FC Köln.
Oh, wow.
If I want to get the the whole name out there. But yeah, I'm lazy a lot of the time, so I just say Koln.
All right, I'm just going to yell Cologne. That's my plan. That's my plan. Actually, I'm just going to cheer for Dusseldorf. That's my plan. That will be easier, I guess, than having to say the other city's name.
Well, also Cologne is also very open to like different names for their city. I mean, the Roman name for the city, and in fact, it was a Roman outpost, and that they're very proud of their Roman heritage, was Colonia. So all the names that sort of stem from that name are where you get Cologne, where you get Köln, where you get any other variation. And even like the club song, one of the songs that people sing at Carnival or sing in various contexts around the club is called Viva Colonia. So, if you say Cologne or Colonia or Köln, they all know what you mean. As long as you have a glass of Kölsch in your hand, they're going to say hurrah.
It has been a very long time since I took Latin, I would say since high school. But I feel like there's a decent chance that Colonia in Latin is colony. Like they're proud of just being called a colony. Is that essentially it?
Yeah. Well, right. If you're the colony,
there we go. All right,
that was named colony. Maybe you're the biggest, best.
You're
colony
the colony. There we go.
Hell yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, Matt, thank you very much for taking the time and for ignoring your dog. I don't want to make you do that anymore, so I will let you go. But if people want to hear more from you or find more from you, how can they do so? Yeah,
I am Mr. Matt Hermann on Twitter, and my podcast is Talking Fussball
It's
on Twitter,
good.
or talkingfussball.com. We come out every week with a match day wrap, and we set up each match day before it comes out with a sort of Bundesliga fantasy league bet to our podcast on Talking Fussball Fantasy. It's a lot of fun.
It is indeed, and I always enjoy listening, and I always enjoy having you on the show. So, Matt, thank you one more time.
Awesome. I love to be on.